So if you are here, I can only assume it's because you are interested in some way in strategy and change. I'm also assuming that if you're here, it's either because you've got some questions about how it all works, or that you think there are some other people at work that would benefit from learning a bit more about this stuff. I spoke at the Getting Shit Done Club in Auckland last week, which was a lot of fun. And one of the most common feedbacks or comments from the people that came along for the afternoon were, man, there's a lot of other people at work that need to be here and listen to this. So I think there's a self-selection thing in here a little bit where if you're the one turning up, you're already part of the way there. But anyway. So look, if you're here, I'm taking it that you're interested in learning a bit more about this stuff. So I'll kick off with a question so we can try that chat function out. If I met anyone from your senior leadership team in the lift today on the way downstairs this afternoon, and I asked them really quickly, this is that elevator pitch thing, what your strategy is, how many different answers do you think I would get? Do you think I would have, one. All right, Andrew. Oh, 5. Yeah, a different version from every person, right? Oh, one vision. Okay, so some of us are working in more strategically mature organisations than others, as we might expect. Some of us don't know the strategy, right? Yeah. I hear that a lot, that you'd either get lots of different answers, that you wouldn't get an answer, or actually maybe worse, that you would get very long convoluted answers that would not fit in the distance that it took to get from one floor to the other in the lift. So you can answer my question, but it's going to take a bit longer than a lift ride. And my view on this is I think that somewhere along the way, we've let the buzzwords take over a little bit. And I think this is particularly true when we're working with ideas and concepts that seem quite abstract, not necessarily real. So we've got leaders and chief executives and board members walking around talking in jargon. And it's really hard to get people interested in jargon. I wrote a little bit about this last week or the week before in my blog, and I had this amazing LinkedIn message, and you'll have to forgive me if you're on the webinar because I can't remember who it was with, but I probably shouldn't name and shame anyway. But I got this wonderful LinkedIn message where the guy said, look, I worked for someone once where you could tell how confident and knowledgeable they were in a particular area because as soon as they were out of their comfort zone, they just slipped into speaking pure jargon. So you'd be sitting in a meeting and all of a sudden realise that you just had a word salad of jargon for the last 5 minutes, and that was how you knew that the CE didn't know what they were talking about. So that gave me a bit of a giggle. It kind of reminds me of that saying, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. And I think strategy is a lot like that. So once we start using jargon and complicated phrasing, it's generally a pretty clear sign that we're not that confident about what we're on about. So if you can't tell me in the lift, there might be a bit of work to do on clarity. I'm working with a central government agency at the moment on their org strategy, and the strategy itself has had like 4 to 6 name changes this year, like what they're calling the strategy. So it's been a plan, it's been a common purpose, it's been a strategy, it's been our mahi. And I sort of think with all this energy going into figuring out what it's called or what the right jargon to use is, that's a bit of a red flag around the clarity and the buy-in at the senior leadership table about what the strategy is actually all about and the confidence and what that is. Okay, who has leaders in their organisation who speak in jargonese when it comes to strategy stuff? Put your hand up if you've got a management team who are guilty of slipping into jargon when it comes to this stuff. The hands, they're flying up fast. Okay, what about this one? It's not Simon Says, but who is guilty themselves of speaking jargon when it comes to strategy stuff? Oh, that's very self-reflective of you all. They didn't go up quite as fast as they did for the first question. Yeah, and me too. I mean, it's hard not to sometimes, and I'm always trying to check myself on this stuff, rewrite the email, change what I'm saying, but it's hard. And I think it would be easy to check out of the whole strategy thing because of this, and I think that people do. I think that when we look at that web of jargon and buzzwords and posters with platitudes on them, it's just kind of really easy to think that it's a waste of time or it's just corporate overhead that we're doing to keep other people happy while everyone else actually gets on with the real work. Does anyone work in a place where this stuff is seen as kind of the fluffy stuff or a waste of time? Put your hand up if you work somewhere where this is all seen as a bit of an indulgence. Yeah. Sorry, team. Well, they're wrong. I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I just think that couldn't be further from the truth. So getting clear on the big picture, and the evidence supports this, is really the best and most valuable use of our time as teams, because if we don't know what it's all for, it's kind of just activity for activity's sake. So I've got some common questions here around what is this stuff, what do all the words mean, how does it fit together, and in particular, why should I care, and what does it have to do with me? Oh, look at that. And you just about saw the whole slideshow in one go. So these are the questions that we're going to look at today. And I've got a list, I've got a big list there of words that come up when we're talking about strategy stuff. And rather than lecture to you all about what they all mean, I'd be quite keen to know which of the words on that list pop out to you as being something that either you're not clear about or that you think is misused. So you're welcome here to pop something in the chat or actually raise your hand if you've got something you'd like to share on some of this jargon, and I'll unmute you and we can have a bit of a chat while you're deciding whether you'd like to participate. In week 1 of my 6-week Q&A video series I'm running on LinkedIn at the moment, the very first question I had was about what is the difference between mission, strategy and tactics, which I thought was a really good question about separating out the how stuff, the why stuff and the what stuff. But actually we could group or theme a bunch of the words on that list using that framework. So values, visions, missions, purpose, these are all pretty much synonyms for the why, whereas strategy, principle, approach, these are all kind of synonyms for that middle piece, the how, and then there's a lot of what words on there: action, initiative, measured by, targets, measures, KPIs, indicators. A lot of the words mean the same thing, but they're not necessarily used correctly or in the right space either. Okay, I see a couple of hands up. So I'm going to take this to mean that we've got a couple of brave people who'd quite like chat on this stuff. Oh, and I've got someone here as well. What's a lagging leading indicator? Yeah, cool. So this is when we're looking at measuring progress against our targets for strategy. And a lagging indicator tells us what's already happened, so we can tell what happened in the past. And a leading indicator is an indication of what's about to happen in the future. So one's old information, one's fresh information. The fresh information tends to be a little bit more proxy, and the lagging stuff tends to be more robust, but also it's old. So it only tells us what happened in the past. The 2-word ones seem more jargony. Yeah, once you start combining buzzwords to make jargon salad, totally agree. Okay, who's got their hand up? Let's have a look. Cut to you, Marion. Did you have a question or a comment on some of that strategy jargon? Just trying to unmute your microphone there. No, we can't hear you, Marion. Let's have a look. You might need to unmute your own microphone there. No, having a bit of trouble there. Let's try you, Jackie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Here we are. Hi, Jackie, how's it going?
Oh, good, thank you. Alicia,
Lovely to have you on the call.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, nice to be here too. That was my question about the lagging leading indicator. So I think you've answered that quite nicely for me.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So, so thanks for that. Now I have a better understanding of what those words are, the jargon is.
Oh, no problem. Maybe we should just swap lagging and leading out for past and future. That'd make life a bit easier, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, that sounds a lot easier.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Jackie. I see, Marion, your microphone's working now. Did you have a question or a comment on some of that jargon? You there, Marion? No? All right, that's all good. Yeah, so I guess the point on the jargon front is that the language we use makes a really big difference. And like the lagging leading versus past future example that we just had, the more we can say what we mean, the better. So, and I think I mentioned this in the last webinar, there's this great thing called processing fluency, which is quite funny because it's jargon in itself. But essentially, the more we use words that people are familiar with and understand, the more they trust us. So actually, when we throw out a lot of the jargonese around strategy, we build trust with people automatically. Okay, so the next question I get is about how it all fits together, and that speaks to the question I had in week 1 that I referred to before around mission, tactics, and strategy. And so I think the problem here with that kind of understanding gap is not with strategy itself. It's the way that we talk about it. It's the way that we understand it and how we get conversations happening at work. And in my experience, particularly in the public sector, this isn't usually because we don't understand the why. So that first layer up there, it's not because we don't understand that. Particularly in government, I find that most leaders do understand the big picture and are quite driven and understand what that purpose looks like. And it's not because we have a problem with the what either. So we're usually kind of overflowing with really passionate technical experts doing great things, great work programs, great initiatives. The problem's in the middle. So the problem is more with being clear about how we make decisions and allocate resources. So that's that middle bit. And this is strategy, like boiled down, this bit in the middle is strategy. It's the connecting piece that brings together the top layer, which is our aspiration. And that's where we use a lot of words like vision, mission, purpose. It's the big picture stuff. It's the why we exist in the first place. So the how bit in the middle, the strategy, brings together our why and our what, which is the daily activities and actions that we are engaged in. And boiled down, really, strategy is just about the how. It's about how we make choices that take us closer to our goals. And it isn't complicated, particularly not when we look at it like this. It's actually very simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy. So what I find, oh my goodness, I'm having some PowerPoint issues today. So what I find when I'm working with teams, and actually I had a cup of coffee this morning with someone who described that middle layer as the missing middle, which I thought was a really good way to talk about it, because the piece around the bridge between the purpose and the stuff we do, the reason it's so hard, is all about that choice factor. So often when I work with an organisation on a new strategy project, what they want to do really, if they're being honest, is to do more stuff. So instead of thinking about, we're thinking about as well as, which is super unhelpful because we don't get any more money and we don't get any more time and we don't get any more bandwidth. So the thing that makes strategy hard when we're looking at the way we choose to reach our goals is the choices piece, because choices mean choosing between one thing and another. So getting from the top layer to the bottom layer in that 3-piece diagram is about taking things away and choosing not to do things in a certain way or not to do things at all, just as much as it is about choosing an approach. Raise your hand if you think that you are lacking the missing middle. Have you got a missing middle in your strategic framework? Oh, ding, ding, ding. Yeah. Yeah, cool. Okay. So this bit's all about the criteria that we use to make decisions one way or another. And the bottom piece becomes really quite astonishingly easy if we nail the first 2 layers, but we can't have the bottom layer and have a really good impact unless we nail the how bit. So I've been working with a fantastic group at Auckland Council who've just been working through this model, and very recently, in the last couple of weeks, have just got some really hard-won clarity on this stuff. And they've been floundering for a couple of years, and not because of the people or because of the content or because of the service. So they're really smart people. They've got really excellent intentions. They understand what we're doing. They're really connected to purpose, really committed to the community. They know what they're all about. They're determined to be strategic, but they had this missing middle. And there's 2 ways to respond to a missing middle, and one is to kind of just screech to a grinding halt on the strategy and delivery front, which is really common, particularly in the public sector. So we just keep adding kind of tasks and not really progressing on the what are we all about piece. And what that means is that the big projects and the big initiatives and the stuff we know we need to move on, but we don't really feel confident doing because we don't have the missing middle in there, just doesn't progress. So we get late projects, we get behind budget, we get upset politicians, we just generally don't look good. But this Auckland Council team, they weren't doing that at all. They were still moving forward full force. Instead, they had just kept adding new stuff in there to try and fill it. So there was strategic plan, action plan, strategy, principles, approach. They just kept designing new stuff and jamming it in. And this is less common, but I do see it quite a bit. So what happened in the end is I asked them how many different kind of strategies or strategic documents they thought they had, and they guessed that they had maybe a couple of dozen. And we had a bit of a ceremony where they brought all their documents along, physical documents, and put them on a table. And they had more than 60. They had over 60 documents sitting in the middle of the table that they had been working on and designing in response to that missing middle, desperately seeking some direction about how to do things. Instead of taking things away, they've been adding them in. So we're down to just 3 now, which is fantastic. But one of the really clear takeaways of that story for me is that strategy isn't a document. It's not a document. It's not a piece of collateral. It's not a poster. It's not a writing exercise. It's definitely not a buzzword. It's just a way to describe how we're going to make choices that get us closer to our why. Does that make sense? I'd love some comments or some questions before I go any further at this point, if you have any. I'll give you a couple of minutes to raise your hand or pop something in the chat. So we've got a couple of raised hands, same raised hands as last time. Is this a sign that we've got more to say or that we've left our hand up? Makes sense. Great. Fantastic. It's nice when it does that. So I mentioned before, and I asked you all actually, whether this stuff was viewed as the fluffy stuff by other people in your organisation, not the real work, the stuff that you do. Oh, I've got a couple of comments in the chat there. Any advice on how to get others and employees to be into the why? Absolutely. Connect them to purpose through meaning and have a longer chat about that. How to get the rest of organisational managers to buy in. Yeah, totally. Oh, you're going to love the future slides. Excellent work, team. Okay, so for those of you who work in organisations where strategy and having that approach is seen as a nice to have or fluffy stuff instead of the main work, first of all, you might enjoy this silly comic that I found on the internet. But second of all, I feel your pain. So I mentioned in my intro blurb that I started my career in local government. So I worked in a reasonably small, modest-sized provincial council, and I did a lot of work with the infrastructure team there. And actually, I still do a bit of work in the engineering industry and in infrastructure. And I often come up against this perception that the framework, the why, the purpose is back office stuff, that it's not relevant to most people, or that it's a nice thing to have, but it doesn't really matter. So maybe it's the stuff that you do when you have a bit of spare time from doing the real work. And this is just a bit of a giggle to me, really, because, I mean, without the thinking and the direction, all that real work is just activity for activity's sake. Yeah? So I mentioned at the start of the webinar about the World Economic Forum report on the future of work, and the most recent version of that came out late last year. So what we understand about the skills and capabilities and functions that are most important inside teams are that there are, I think, according to, I think it's J. Bradford DeLong, economic historian, there are 10 levels of how humans add productive economic value, labour-wise, at work. And so the first few levels are all about manual skills, working with machines, and then we move into working with information, working with numbers, then we move into working with people, being relative, and then we move into working with problems, solving problems, thinking creatively, making connections. And when it comes to leadership and job skills and functions at work, that framework applies really nicely. So as we step through that ladder from operational leadership to managerial leadership to relational, all the way up to strategic, the more value we find is added overall to organisational performance. So strategy-led organisations tend to do better financially, they produce more outcomes, they're better prepared to respond to the future. But more than that, people who work in a strategy or purpose-led environment can connect to that. So connection to meaning and purpose is the single biggest motivator for employee engagement and employee retention. So if people know why they're doing what they're doing and how they can do a good job of it, they stay and they do better work. And it sounds really basic when we put it like that, but yet somehow it still falls down the totem pole. And there's evidence after evidence of the importance of that purpose and of communicating that and the difference that that makes to our impact and also to our teams. But we do tend to lose sight of it. So Dan Pink, who wrote a book called Drive, writes about intrinsic motivation. So that's the idea of having people do great stuff because they want to. And there are 3 elements to it. And the first element is purpose. So connecting to a bigger picture is the number one driver for people to be motivated to do great work. And the second one is autonomy. So enabling the space for people to make decisions that reflect the big picture. And the third is mastery. So give me the ability to be great at it. Value what I do. Help me see how it connects to the big picture and make it easy for me to do a great job. And if we can do those things, people are committed, they're engaged, they stay in their work, they look for opportunities to deliver more value and more impact. And we wind up in a situation, and this is where I think that strategic direction piece really comes into play. Have you ever bought a new car and you've never seen the car, never seen those cars before? And as soon as you've bought the car, you're driving up the motorway and they just seem to be every second vehicle is the same make as your new car. So this is that knowledge framing piece where once we change our frame, we filter information differently. We see new opportunities, we understand things differently. And engaging people in strategy is quite similar in that if everybody's in alignment and running to the same direction, they start to see opportunities that they never saw before. They start to build relationships differently. They tackle problems differently because that's the frame that they have. So you unleash this kind of domino effect throughout the organisation and then to your customers and your community and your stakeholders by getting people involved. So that's a really long-winded way of answering your question to say it is to everybody's benefit, leaders, employees, customers, community, performance results. That strategy is there, front of mind, visible, and everyone's involved in it. So why do we need strategy? We need this stuff so that we've got a direction. So we're not mucking around with activity for activity's sake. So we're super clear and super intentional about purpose and the future. And we need it so that we're all paddling the walker in the same direction. I mean, this is basic stuff, yeah? If we're not aligned in a way that means we're speaking the same language and aiming for the same goals from the top to the bottom, it's really bloody hard to get there. I mentioned the engagement piece before. Motivating and supporting people to do a good job means understanding why and what success looks like. We do it so that we can maximise the impact that we're having. This is particularly important in government and in the public sector, where we're spending public money to create public good. So it's really important that we're focusing our attention in the areas where we create the most good and that we optimise the ability to do that. And if we're not all singing from the same hymn sheet and working together toward the same goal, it's really difficult to maximise that impact. And interestingly, one of the other key advantages of working with strategy is that we're able to adapt better. So I hear a lot, look, there's no point, Alicia, doing this strategy stuff because as soon as the ink's dry, everything's changed again. Before we've even communicated that with anyone, everything's changed. And I've read some really good research on this recently that suggests having that why and that strategic direction and that how locked in and visible and discussed means that we adapt more quickly when things change because we understand what matters and how we work, and also that we adapt better. Because otherwise we're responding from a place of reaction. We're being ad hoc. We're just dealing with things as they pop up. But when we've been really clear about why we're in business in the first place and what matters to us, we respond to change in ways that reflect that. So ironically, having that strategy helps us to adapt to the future rather than constrains it. So if we were to think about that as a process or as a step from one to the other, we can't get all the way to adaptation, unfortunately, from the beginning. There is a bit of a maturity model when we look at building strategic capability inside a team. So for those of you who are asking questions about how we get people on board, we kind of don't get to start at the engagement piece or the impact piece. We've got to cycle all the way down and go, right, before we do anything else, is our purpose clear? Have we got clear direction from our senior leaders, from our governance, from our council, from our board about what we're doing here? Because unless we have that, we've got no anchor to hook into, right? Once we've got that, we get to start thinking about asking questions about how we do things. How do we align and remove friction and make sure that the way we do business aligns with the reason we're in business, yeah? And it's only at that point, when we've got that clarity and we've removed the friction and made it possible to succeed, that we get to have conversations with people and go, hey, what does this mean to you? How does this apply to your mahi? What will you need from us to support your autonomy and your mastery to make this happen? And if we do a really good job of that, if we've got our purpose locked in, we've got a clear process, we've got people on board, then we get to do awesome planning, and then we get to make awesome progress. But trying to skip to those end pieces and just writing a plan, man, I see this all the time. Actually, I've been speaking for a while and I haven't had some raised hands for a while. If anybody's worked somewhere where they've tried to skip straight to that orange layer and just written a plan before they've done what are we here for? How do we get there? What do people matter? Raise your hand if you've gone straight to plan. Yeah. Yeah. You are not alone, friends. Okay, so the final thing I'm going to touch on today as part of my Strategy 101 taster, which also speaks to the questions that have just come through. And I actually wrote on this on my blog this week. So anyone who's on the Wednesday Wisdom list, you will have read this. I see a bit of this not my job stuff. Strategy's not my job. It's the job of people who sit around the board table. It's my manager's job. It's not my job. And I grabbed these couple of pictures online, and I think they're kind of a hilarious but quite sad example of the lengths that people will go to avoid doing things that they don't think relate specifically to them and their work. The flip side of that being, as I was just talking about with connecting to meaning, people will also go to great lengths to deliver on that purpose if they feel connected to it and they know what it is. What we're not great at doing organisationally is making it clear and obvious to people how strategy is their job and how they fit. So when I see leaders rolling out strategy and running roadshows and doing presentations, what I tend to see is a CE or a tier 2 stand up and say, this is what we're all about. It's very exciting. This is our vision. These are our objectives. We're going to make the world better. We're going to deliver impact for New Zealanders. It's going to be wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful. And they sit down. And this is great. It's all very inspiring and people feel very connected to why they work there, and that's lovely. But there's very little direction that says, and here's how this relates to your job, and here's what we need from you to make it real. But I'm very firmly of the opinion that strategy is everyone's job. Not everybody has the same job when it comes to strategy, but it is everyone's job. So the why and the big picture should be handled and shaped and managed at the top level, yeah? Board, governance, council, senior leadership team, decision makers. That's where the direction should be coming from. And it should be informed by the wider organisation and the wider operating context, but that's where that should be coming from. The how the decision-making piece where we decide how things are done around here, and we use that as a framework for setting budgets, for designing approaches, that should be managed by decision leaders. So that's senior leadership team, and it's also people leaders and subject matter expert functional leaders. So their job is not just to design and apply that approach stuff, but also to communicate it in a way that's meaningful, to get it out there and to say to everybody, this is how we do things around here. How can we support you? And the what, that bottom layer, that is literally everyone's job. So in that diagram, it uses the terminology decision takers, which is talking about those inside an organisation that don't have the delegation to make strategic decisions, but are making decisions on a daily basis that affect whether or not we deliver on those goals. And that is everyone. There's that whole piece around sales and customer service is everyone's job. Yeah, so from the first phone call or your first interaction at reception, that has an impact on you as a customer who's experiencing a company for the first time. And I think that it should be the same with strategy. Strategy is everyone's job, because all the way down to the frontline staff and all the way up to the chief executive, if we're not making decisions and behaving on a daily basis in ways that align with what we say matters, the whole thing falls over. So strategy is everyone's job. And I hope that is a useful response to the question about illustrating and connecting with people inside your organisation who don't feel as though it's their job. But I'm happy to take this chat offline and to talk a little bit more about that with those of you who've asked those questions. So we're just about at the end. Just quickly, do we have any extra questions or comments to chuck through on the chat before I wrap up, which I think we're actually pretty much being on time, which is nice. Got a couple of minutes spare that we can use for chats. Yeah. Jacob, just about your point around mastery, the mastery piece of motivation is often lacking in the strategy itself. So you can't just ask for it to be done, explain it's being done and hope that it's done. You're so right. And that capacity building is one part of that. And I think capability building is too. So equipping people with the skills, much like that strategy is the future of work model I had up there before, equipping people with the skills to do something with that information is really important. And then aligning your processes and policies and business systems in a way that support that is really important too. So what I see a lot of is we ask for one thing in the strategy, whether that's long-term outcomes, whether it's collaboration, that how we work piece, but then we make it really, really hard for people to actually do that. So collaborations are well and good until you find out that you can't share a cost code, for example, or asking for long-term outcome planning is really good until you realise that KPIs inside people's performance agreements actually reward short-term financial focus over that long term. So the capacity building is as much about skills building as it is about organisational capacity. But without that support and structure to remove the friction and make it possible for people to do what we're asking, whether strategy is their job or not, they won't be able to do it. So I think that's a really great point. Thank you, Jacob. All right, well, I will wrap up this month's webinar. Thank you all so much for coming along and for participating in the chat. It was fantastic to have you here. This will be recorded and available on YouTube and sent out via email also. So if you want to share this content with anybody else in your workplace, you are more than welcome to do that. If you enjoyed yourself, you are more than welcome to chuck something on LinkedIn or social media. Strategy 101 is my new internal training program. It's designed for staff at all levels to get a grounding in the basics and foundations of strategy, why it's important, how it works, what it's all about and why it matters. Hopefully you enjoyed this afternoon's taster. I offer workshops, training, speaking and coaching for everything to do with strategy and change. If you've got any questions or you want to talk further about anything at all, please feel free to hit up my website, aliciamackay.co.nz, or to get in touch with me personally. I always love talking to you all. It was great to have you here. Thank you so much.